It was 1991, and Eddie Van Halen stepped onto the stage in Anaheim, California, standing in front of a massive wall of Peavey amplifiers. Cameras flashed, the crowd went wild, and everything looked exactly the way a major endorsement deal was supposed to look. The contract had already been signed months earlier. Millions of dollars were involved. A signature amplifier line was ready to launch, and global promotions were lined up. The Peavey 5150 was being introduced as the future of rock guitar tone, supposedly designed to Eddie's exact specifications. But just a few miles away, inside Eddie's legendary 5150 studio in Studio City, something very different was happening. Hidden behind locked doors and stacked road cases sat several vintage Marshall Super lead heads. They weren't museum pieces. They were powered on, still warm from the night before, and very much in use. What Peavey executives didn't realize was that Eddie Van Halen was quietly running one of the most carefully planned gear illusions in rock history, a secret he would protect for nearly 10 years. Long before Peavey ever entered the picture, Eddie's relationship with Marshall amplifiers was already legendary. Ever since Van Halen's debut album exploded in 1978, guitar players around the world became obsessed with one thing: the mysterious brown sound. That smooth yet aggressive tone that seemed to sing, scream, and breathe all at the same time. Eddie created it using a late 1960s Marshall Super lead, a variac transformer to lower the voltage, and a set of personal modifications that he guarded closely. Those Marshall amps weren't just tools to him. They were part of his musical identity. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, the music industry was changing fast. Endorsement deals had become massive business, and gear companies were willing to pay huge sums just to attach their brand to legendary artists. Peavey Electronics, known for building reliable and affordable gear, wanted more than respect. They wanted prestige. When they approached Eddie with an offer that included creative input and the chance to design a dream amplifier from scratch, it was hard to say no. The contract was finalized in late 1990, and by early 1991 Peavey engineers were constantly flying into Eddie's studio. They analyzed circuits, tested prototypes, and tried to recreate the brown sound for mass production. Every visit looked legitimate. Peavey amps were plugged in, powered up, and positioned front and center. Everything appeared transparent. But behind the scenes, the real tone was coming from somewhere else entirely. Eddie had planned everything down to the smallest detail. His longtime guitar tech played a key role in keeping the operation flawless. Whenever Peavey representatives were scheduled to visit, the Marshall heads were quietly rolled out of sight, hidden behind road cases and gear racks. Cables were rerouted so the signal appeared to be running through the Peavey amps. Indicator lights were staged. Even control room monitors were set up to reinforce the illusion. It was a carefully choreographed performance, and Eddie knew exactly how to play his part. By 1992, the Peavey 5150 officially hit the market, and it was a huge success. It delivered aggressive gain, sharp attack, and a tight low end that fit perfectly with the heavy music dominating the early 1990s. Bands like Deftones and Limp Bizkit embraced it, and the amp quickly became a staple in studios and on stages around the world. For many players, the 5150 defined an era. The irony was that the amplifier carrying Eddie Van Halen's name had very little to do with the tones Eddie himself was actually recording. The Peavey 5150 wasn't a bad amp. It just wasn't his sound. Eddie's real tone came from years of experimentation. His variac setup reduced voltage, creating natural compression and harmonic richness that modern amps were designed to avoid. Most 1990s amplifiers focused on consistency and stability. Eddie's Marshalls were unpredictable and temperamental. They responded differently every night, and when everything aligned just right, they produced a tone that felt alive. Those Marshall heads weren't stock either. Eddie had modified them repeatedly, swapping components, bypassing circuits, and rebuilding them like a mad scientist. Each one became a unique creation, much like his Frankenstrat guitar. Peavey engineers were trying to capture lightning in a bottle, but Eddie had already moved the bottle somewhere else. By the late 1990s, rumors began spreading. Studio insiders started sharing stories online, quietly confirming what many guitar players suspected. One engineer from the balance sessions recalled entering the room to adjust a microphone and discovering that the Peavey head on display wasn't even plugged in. The guitar signal was running into a Marshall hidden inside a road case with a fake front panel. Even seasoned professionals had been fooled. Eventually, the truth reached Peavey's executives. Around 1998, after a magazine interview mentioned Eddie still recording through Marshalls, a private meeting was arranged at the 5150 studio. The atmosphere was tense. Contracts were discussed. Legal language was thrown around. But Eddie didn't deny anything. He calmly explained the technical differences and made it clear that while the Peavey 5150 was a great amplifier, it wasn't the sound he had spent his life chasing. Peavey faced a decision. The 5150 was selling in massive numbers, and Eddie's name still carried enormous weight. In the end, they chose compromise over conflict. The marketing language quietly changed. Eddie was no longer described as using the amp exclusively. Instead, it became the amp inspired by his sound. A subtle shift, but an important one. In 2004, Eddie finally stepped away from Peavey and partnered with Fender to create EVH gear. This time, the amps were far closer to the truth. The EVH 5153 models reflected the feel, response, and character of Eddie's modified Marshalls. Guitar magazines immediately noticed the difference. For the first time, fans were hearing something that truly matched the legend. After Eddie's passing in 2020, tributes poured in from across the music world. Almost all of them focused on his innovation, his creativity, and that unmistakable tone. Interestingly, Peavey was rarely mentioned. The story always came back to the Frankenstrat, the Variac-powered Marshalls, and the endless experimentation that defined Eddie's life. Because Eddie Van Halen's sound was never about branding. It was about feel. He didn't just play his gear. He pushed it, fought it, and shaped it until it responded to him alone. His amplifiers weren't perfect or predictable, but they were alive. And when Eddie played, they spoke in a voice no factory design could ever truly copy. That's the real legacy. Not an endorsement deal. Not a product launch, but a lifelong obsession with sound, creativity, and pushing boundaries. And that's why, decades later, Eddie Van Halen's tone still feels untouchable.